how I'm making these tar roofs using tissue paper. And so here's a quick video. I'm just gonna capture myself doing that on the remaining portion of this roof. You can see here that it's just got the base coat of tan paint on it. What I will be doing is creating a roof that looks like this. You can see it's just basically strips of tissue paper laid into paint, and I've already cut my tissue paper into strips about 3/4 of an inch wide. And what I will do is apply some very thin acrylic paint on there, and then I'll just lay it into the paint and let the paint soak through it, and the paint is actually going to be what holds it on. Alright, so I will go ahead and get started doing that, and hope this turns out. Now the first part of this is to mix the paint color that we're going to use, and I'll show you. I just use these Craft acrylic paints. This is Americana. I think these are all the same brand. There's several brands you can get at any kind of Michael's art supply store, or you can probably even find them at Walmart. And so basically I'm going to mix black with a tan color. This is cocoa. And then if I need to lighten it up a little bit, some white. But primarily it's going to be the black and the tan. So we'll put roughly equal proportions of each. I just always do this by eye. And then we need to thin it. I use a little pipette, get some water. And maybe we'll add just a touch of white. Let's blend that. And I just use the brush that I'm going to be using, dip it in some water, and then just... Alright, so we've got a good color mixed up here. You can see it's pretty thin. Not exactly a wash, a little bit thicker than a wash. And what I'll do is I'll get my strip ready. And you also want to have an X-Acto knife ready, because I'm going to need to cut it right at this angle as best I can. And what I might go ahead and do is cut this to size ahead of time. Let's see if that works. Because once it gets wet, it's going to be very difficult to do anything to it without totally destroying it. So we'll cut that piece. Let's lift that out of the way. And now we'll take and apply some of this paint all the way across here. And now we'll just, as carefully as possible, lay this in here. You can see the color soaks through right immediately. And you can see I didn't get color all the way into the edge here, so I'm going to very gently touch some more paint into that. And it'll soak it right up. And so now we want to continue on with the next row. And just keep going while everything is still wet. So I'll just keep doing that and probably stop talking. You want to overlap each one about halfway with the one previous. And I'll see if I can cut this off right at the edge there. If at all possible, you want all of the color to come through, soaking from the bottom through, because that'll give you an even coverage. That spot that I just touched up is probably going to come out looking a little darker than the rest when it all is dry. I'll go ahead and cut that off to the angle, because that's actually an easy way to lay it in there and then cut it off. You kind of discover these things on the fly while the paint's wet. Just try and get enough on there. And I'm not getting a perfectly straight line there, so I'm going to lift it up and kind of try and reorient it a little bit. And I'm going to need to cut a half strip to get this very last portion of it. Let me get this in place first. I'm going to need to touch that up just a little bit. Cut me a half strip here. Alright, let's move on to the rest of this roof here. It should be easier because I don't have the angles to deal with. And because this is rectangular, I could just go ahead and cut all of these strips exactly to the length that I need, rather than having to cut them off in the field. But that might actually be easier, because it does, when it gets wet, you saw that it gets a little bit softer, and it's actually easy to make that cut. So I'm just going to proceed on that assumption. Perhaps I spoke too soon. Maybe it is easier to cut first, just because it's not staying in place long enough for me to cut it. But maybe what I can do is just go ahead and do the next one, and I'll just kind of roughly cut it a little larger than I needed. and I'll just come back later after it's dry and cut all the excess off. And that's what you want to see, is just enough paint coming through to change the color. You don't want to see like what I've got going on down here. It's puddling and the paint's kind of coming through to the top. Same as what happened over here when I touched that up. In those places the paint's going to be a little bit thicker and the color will be a little bit different because of that, but we can live with a little bit of minor variation. Okay, now just to show you, I had a little bit of an issue with this one starting to bunch up and scrunch together, and it just didn't look right. So I just peeled it right off, and I'm going to put a fresh one on in its place. Put a little bit more paint back down, just because it did remove some paint when I took it off. Let's put that side down. I'm still getting a little bit of wrinkling up here, but it's not as bad as the other one. And it adds some variety to the texture. And finally the half strip to cover that last portion. That's all there is to it. I'll let that dry and then I'll cut off right at the edge there. And I'll use the same paint color to do the back side of the parapet here. You can, if you want to, I did this on one of the other ones, you can try and take one of these and fold it so that it's got a nice crease in it, and set that with the crease right down in the corner there so that it laps going up the parapet as well as out. But in this case there's so little parapet to worry about, I'm just going to use the paint and trust that color. And so you'll see when that dries, it'll give you this nice texture. And I'll show you some still shots that show it up a little bit closer. Some of these areas where there's a little bit of discoloration or bunching up or whatnot, I'm going to probably just put a rooftop air conditioner over that to hide that, and you can do similar things. You can see here, this is where I did the creasing and folding it to let it wrap up the side of the parapet to cover that gap. I did that on both sides. So the hard part is trying to get the lines mostly straight, but with a little bit of practice you'll get the hang of doing that passably at least. And hope you enjoyed the video, and I will sign off for now and show you some still shots of the finished product when it's done.